Chapter 2 Mr. Sherlock Holmes' Discourses. It was one of those dramatic moments for which my friend existed. It would be an overstatement to say that he was shocked or even excited by the amazing announcement. Without having a tinge of cruelty in his singular composition, he was undoubtedly callous from long overstimulation. Yet his emotions were dulled, his intellectual perceptions were exceedingly active. There was no trace then of the horror which I had myself felt at this curt declaration, but his face showed rather the quiet and interested composure of a chemist who sees the chemicals falling into position from this oversaturated solution. "Remarkable," he said. "Remarkable." "You don't seem surprised." "Interested, Mr. Mac, but hardly surprised. Why should I be surprised? I receive an anonymous communication from a quarter from which I know to be important, warning me that danger threatens a certain person. Within an hour I learn of this danger. It has actually materialized, and that person is dead. I am interested, but as you observe, I am not surprised." In a few short sentences, he explained to the inspector the facts about the letter and the cipher. MacDonald sat with his chin on his hands and his great sandy eyebrows bunched in a yellow triangle. "I was going down to Browstone this morning," said he. "I'd come to ask you if you cared to come with me, you and your friend here. But from what you say, we might perhaps be doing better work in London." "I rather think not," said Holmes. "Hang it all, Mr. Holmes," cried the inspector. "The papers will be full of the Browstone mystery in a day or two. But where's the mystery of the man in London who prophesied the crime before it ever occurred? We only have to lay our hands on that man and the rest will follow." "No doubt, Mr. Mac. But how do you propose to lay your hands on the so-called Porlock?" MacDonald turned over the letter which Holmes had handed him. "Hostess in Camberwell. That doesn't help us much. Name, you say, is assumed. Not much to go on, certainly. Didn't you say that you have sent him money?" "Twice." "And how?" "In notes to Camberwell post office." "Did you never trouble to see who called for them?" "No." The inspector looked surprised and a little shocked. "Why not?" "Because I keep faith. I promised him when he first wrote that I would not try to trace him." "You think there's someone behind him?" "I know there is." "This professor that I've heard you mention?" "Exactly." Inspector MacDonald smiled, and his eyelid quivered as he glanced towards me. "I won't conceal from you, Mr. Holmes, but I think that in the CID you have a wee bit of a bee in your bonnet over this professor. I've made some inquiries myself about the matter, and he seems to be a very respectable, learned, and talented sort of man." "I'm glad you've got as far as to recognize his talent." "Man, you can't but recognize it. After I heard your view, I made it my business to see him. I had a chat with him on the eclipses. How the talk got that way, I cannot think. But he had out reflector lantern and a globe and made it all very simple in a minute. He lent me a book, but I don't mind saying that it was a bit above my head, although I had a good Aberdeen upbringing. He'd have made the Grand Minister, with his thin face and grey hair and solemn-like way of talking. When he put his hand on my shoulder, as if he were pouting, it was like a father's blessing before you go out into the cold, cruel world." Holmes chuckled and rubbed his hands. "Great!" he cried. "Great! Tell me, dear friend MacDonald, this is a pleasing and touching interview. I suppose in the professor's study?" That's so. It's a fine room, is it not? Very fine. Very handsome indeed, Mr. Holmes. You sat in front of his writing desk. Just so. Sun in your eyes and his face in the shadow. Well, it was evening, and I mind that the lamp was turned on my face. It would be. Did you happen to observe a picture above the professor's head? I don't miss much, Mr. Holmes. Maybe I learned that from you. Yes, I saw the picture. A young woman with her head on her hands, peeking at you sideways. That painting was by Jean-Baptiste Grez. The inspector endeavored to look interested. Jean-Baptiste Grez, Holmes continued, joining his fingers and leaning back in his chair, was a French artist who flourished between the years of 1750 and 1800. I allude, of course, to his working career. Modern criticism has more than endorsed his high opinion formed of him by his contemporaries. The inspector's eyes grew abstracted. Hadn't we better, he said. We are doing so, Holmes interrupted. All that I am saying is a very direct and vital bearing upon what you have called the Brostone mystery. In fact, it may be, in a sense, to be called the very center of it. MacDonald smiled feebly and looked appealingly to me. Well, thoughts move a bit too quick for me, Mr. Holmes. You leave out a link or two, and I can't get over the gap. What in the wide world can be the connection between this dead painting man and the affair of Brostone? All knowledge comes useful to the detective, remarked Holmes. Even the trivial fact that in the year of 1865 a picture by Grez, entitled La Jeune Fille à l'Aiguillon, fetched not less than £4,000 at the Portalis sale, may start a train of reflection in your mind. It was clear that it did, and the inspector looked honestly interested. I may remind you, Holmes continued, that the professor's salary can be ascertained in several trustworthy books of reference. It is $700 a year. Then how could he buy... Quite so. How could he? It's remarkable, said the inspector thoughtfully. Talk away, Mr. Holmes. I'm just loving it. It's fine. Holmes smiled. He was always warmed by genuine admiration, a characteristic of a real artist. What about Brostone? He asked. We've time yet, said the inspector, glancing at his watch. I have a cab at the door, and it won't take us 20 minutes to Victoria. But about this picture, I thought you told me once, Mr. Holmes, that you'd never met Professor Moriarty. No, I never have. Then how do you know about his rooms? That's another matter. I've been there 3 times in his rooms, twice waiting for him under different pretexts, and leaving before he came. Once, well, I can hardly tell you about the once to the official detective. It was on the last occasion that I took the liberty of running over his papers, with the most unexpected results. You found something compromising? Absolutely nothing. That was what amazed me. However, you have now seen the point of the picture. It shows him to be a very wealthy man. How did he acquire wealth? He is unmarried. His younger brother is a station master in the west of England. His chair is worth $700 a year. And he owns a Grez. Well, surely the inference is plain. You mean that he has a great income, and that he must earn it in an illegal fashion? Exactly, of course. I have other reasons to think so. Dozens of extraneous threads which lead vaguely up towards the center of the web where the motionless creature is lurking. I only mention the grooves because it belongs as a matter within the range of your own observation. Well, Mr. Holmes, I admit that what you say is interesting. It's more than interesting, it's wonderful. But let us have a little clearer if you can. Is it forgery, coining, burglary? Where does the money come from? Have you ever read Jonathan Wild? The name has a familiar sound. Someone in a novel. Was he not? I don't take much stock in detectives of novels. Chaps that do things and never let you see how they do them. That's just inspiration, not business. Jonathan Wild wasn't a detective, and he wasn't in a novel. He was a master criminal, and he lived last century. 1750, to thereabouts. And he's of no use to me. I'm a practical man. Mr. Mac, the most practical thing that you ever did in your life would be to shut yourself up for 3 months and read 12 hours a day of the annals of crime. Everything comes in circles. Even Professor Moriarty. Jonathan Wild was the hidden force of London criminals, to whom he sold his brains and his organization on 15 cents per commission. The old wheel turns and the same spoke comes up. It's all been done before, and it will be again. I'll tell you one or two things about Moriarty which may interest you. You'll interest me right enough. I happen to know who's the first link in this chain. A chain with this Napoleon gone wrong at one end, and 100 broken fighting men, pickpockets, blackmailers, and card sharpers at the other, with every sort of crime in between. His chief of staff is Colonel Sebastian Morin, as aloof and guarded as inaccessible to the law as himself. Who do you think pays him? I'd like to hear. 6,000 a year. That's paying for brains, you see, the American business principle. I learned the detail quite by chance. It's more than the Prime Minister gets. That gives you the idea of Moriarty's gains and on the scale of which he works. Another point, I made it my business to hunt down some of Moriarty's checks lately. Just common innocent checks that he pays his household bills with. They were drawn on 6 different banks. Does that make any impression on your mind? Queer, certainly, but what do you gather from it? That he wanted no gossip about his wealth. No single man should know what he had. I have no doubt that he has 20 banking accounts, the bulk of his fortune abroad in the Deutsche Bank, or in the Credit Lyonnais, as likely as not. Sometime when you have a year or two to spare, I recommend you to the study of Professor Moriarty. Inspector MacDonald had grown steadily more impressed as the conversation proceeded. He had lost himself in his interests. Now his practical Scotch intelligence brought him back with a snap to the matter at hand. "He can keep anyhow," he said. "You've got us sidetracked with your interesting anecdotes, Mr. Holmes. What really counts is your remark that there is some connection between the professor and this crime. That you get the warning received through the man Porlock. Can we, for our present practical needs, get any further than that?" "We may form some conception as to the motives of the crime. It is, as I gather from your original remarks, an inexplicable, or at least unexplained murder. Now, presuming that the source of the crime is as we suspect it to be, there might be 2 different motives. In the first place, I may tell you that Moriarty rules with a rod of iron over his people. His discipline is tremendous. There's only one punishment for his code. It is death. Now, we might suppose that this murdered man, this Douglas, who approaching fate was known by one of the arch-criminal's subordinates, had in some way betrayed the chief. This punishment followed, and would be known to all, if only to put fear of death into them. Well, that is one suggestion, Mr. Holmes. The other is that it was engineered by Moriarty in the ordinary course of business. Was there any robbery? I've not heard. If so, it would, of course, be against the first hypothesis in favor of the second. Moriarty may have been engaged to engineer it on the promise of parts spoils, or he may have been paid so much to manage it. Either is possible, but whichever it may be, or of its third combination, it is down at Burlstone, that we must seek the solution. I know a man too well to suppose that he has left anything up there which may lead us to him. Then to Burlstone we must go, cried MacDonald, leaping from his chair. My word, it's later than I thought. I can give you gentlemen 5 minutes for preparation, and that is all. And ample for us both, said Holmes as he sprang up and hastened to change into his dressing gown to his coat. While we are on our way, Mr. Mac, I will ask you to be good enough to tell me all about it. All about it proved to be a little disappointing. And yet there was enough to assure that in this case before us might as well be worthy of an expert's closest attention. He brightened and rubbed his thin hands as he listened to the mere but remarkable details. A long series of sterile weeks lay behind us, and here, at last, there was a fitting object for those remarkable powers which, like all special gifts, become irksome to their owner when they are not in use. That razor brain blunted and rusted with inaction. Sherlock Holmes's eyes glistened, his pale cheeks took a warmer hue, and his whole eager face shone with an inward light when the call for work reached him. Leaning forward in the cab, he listened intently to MacDonald's short sketch of the problem which awaited us in the Sussex. The inspector was himself dependent, as he explained to us, upon the scribbled account forwarded to him by the milk train in the early hours of the morning. White Mason, the local officer, who was a personal friend, and hence MacDonald had been notified very much more promptly than usual at Scotland Yard when provincials need their assistance. It is a very cold scent, one which the metropolitan expert is generally asked to run. Dear Inspector MacDonald, said the letter which he read to us, official requisition for your services in the separate envelope. This is for your private eye. Wire me what train in the morning you can get to Burlstone, and I will meet it, or have it met if I am too occupied. The case is a snorter. Don't waste a moment in getting started. If you can bring Mr. Holmes, please do so, for he will find something after his own heart. You would think that the whole thing had been fixed up for the theatrical effect, if there wasn't a dead man in the middle of it. My word, this is a snorter. Your friend appears to be no fool, thought Holmes. No, sir. White Mason is a very alive man, if I am of any judge. Well, have you anything more? Only that he will give us every detail when we meet. Then how did you get at Mr. Douglas and the fact that he had been horribly murdered? That was in the enclosed official report. It didn't say horrible. That's not a recognized term. It gave the name of John Douglas. It mentioned that his injuries had been in the head from the discharge of a shotgun. It also mentioned the hour of alarm, which was close to midnight last night. It added that the case was undoubtedly one of murder, and that no arrest had been made, and that the case was one which presented some very perplexing and extraordinary details. That's absolutely all we have at present, Mr. Holmes. Then, with your permission, we will leave it at that, Mr. Mac. The temptation to form premature theories upon insufficient data is the bane of our profession. I can only see two things of certain at present: a great brain in London and a dead man in Sussex. There is a chain between them that we are going to trace.